Peace, everybody. How y'all doing? Well, I ain't got to ask my first question. We seen the trailer, which is a powerful. I think I interviewed you on my Griot show, and I got to see the film, and it's such an amazing story. Um, I'm not going to ask you to recap that, but can you just say a little bit about how how do you make sense of that journey going from this moment where you were given an impossible sentence to a moment where you got free?
Um, Making sense of it was tough, especially when I was on the inside and I would see the American flag and wonder why this country chose to sentence me to 24 and a half years as a first time nonviolent drug offender. And I had just given birth to my son, and I was grateful that I had my parents that could raise him. But it was always important for me while I was inside to use my story to help other people, because when I looked in federal prison, I saw a lot of women that looked just like me who had similar stories. So in making sense of it, I realized that once I walked out of those prison doors that I couldn't, you know, throw that chapter away and move on with my life. I left so many other people that deserved clemency too. And so, I want a big shout out to the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, because basically, when my parents were trying to bring me home and fight, they were at a CBC Foundation dinner, and President Clinton was speaking. It's in the movie. And basically, my mom had the opportunity to say, I'm Kemba Smith's mother. And it caused President Clinton to turn around and basically let my mom know that he was working on my situation. So I'm grateful to the CBC and their support in helping to bring me home. But again, the story, nobody's just going to put their trauma out there just to be telling the story. For me, it continues to still be centered around using the power of storytelling to help young people make better choices, see how easy it is to get caught up in the system. I know we have a bunch of young people in the room I saw coming in, but also to advocate for those that I left behind, and not when it's just centered around a nonviolent story. I want to humanize people. I want people to understand how you can wind up getting into the criminal justice system and how there needs to be people need to look at mitigating circumstances surrounding around that.
That's such an important point. Kimba could have walked out of that prison and just went to work. She could have just made money. She could have just said, I'm going to worry about my family, which she did. But she said, I'm going to do all those things. I'm going to turn my pain into power so that other people don't end up here. The thing about your story that's so extraordinary to me is, the Bill Clinton part of it, right? But for every person that gets Bill Clinton to get them out of prison, to give them clemency or a pardon or a commutation or whatever different people get, there's the 99.999% of people who have to live with the outcome. So part of what, and I'm telling this for y'all benefit, particularly the younger people here, part of what the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation is doing is creating the conditions where you get the education and the knowledge and the training and the advice and the stories so that you don't have to get out of something, but rather you can not get into something. I watch. It's important, y'all. It really is. Talk to me about. You said something that I really thought was interesting. I've been thinking about a lot. Is choices. I do a lot of media now. I've sort of circled back. I do political media, but I do a lot of hip hop media, a lot of cultural media, and I keep seeing so many young people, and I can call them young now in their 20s. I got kids that age, right? Who they be on the internet telling their crimes.
Wilding out.
It's like my generation did crimes. We ain't like brag about it. We don't be like, yo, I left the work in the band around the corner on 47th Street, and that dude around the corner, I killed 3 people. His name is such and such. I did it on Tuesday at 4 o'clock. I hit a weapon. There's a
all the business, all the tea.
I'm sort of thinking about how little some of our community, particularly our younger people, know about their rights, about their responsibilities, about the criminal justice system and how to navigate it. Not to avoid getting caught for crimes, but to understand how the system works.
Yeah, I find that a lot of people don't realize just how easy it is to get caught up. And oftentimes, because we have young people raising young people, and again, people not really understanding the mitigating circumstances, some of our young people, because as you heard in my bio, I served on the Virginia Parole Board, and some people aren't afforded a first chance in life. So if they don't see that love within their communities, if they don't see it within the schools where they're in rundown schools, then with some of their mentality and how they're internalizing all this, and we don't know what trauma they're dealing with, they just don't care. And so I feel like, our churches, our universities, all of us need to be reaching into those communities and bridging the gap. I also, with young people and other people's stories, I think, we have certain states that want to get rid of our history. And I know when I was in federal prison, I'm ashamed to say that I went to predominantly white schools. I knew the Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks. I even went to Hampton University, and I probably, was wilding out a little bit myself still with chasing this relationship. But it wasn't until prison where I read Sister Soldier's book and I learned the history. And when I learned that history and I eventually taught a Black history class, it made me want to smack myself, because basically my commitment from having that knowledge from that point forward was about me wanting to uphold that torch of the sacrifices, blood, sweat, and tears that our people have went through. And it helped me value me. It helped me understand my own resilience. So I think young people need to tap into that. But when they think life is hard, but when they read those slave narratives and read how our people went through that and we are where we are today, I think it would make a tremendous difference. But yeah, I hope that answers.
No, that's very much so. I hear you talk about, and I know your story well, and I watched the film, and I also just know the story from knowing lots of people. I see how many Black women and girls get caught up in the criminal justice system, not because they're making illegal decisions per se, but because they are attached to people or they're in relationships with people who are doing that. I mean, in your case, y'all just saw, even if you don't know the full story, they're like, we don't want you.
Right.
We want him. But but you'll be collateral damage. You'll be disposable. How does that make you, when you talk to young people about the choices they make, and I'm not blaming women and girls for the choices of their men, I'm saying the system does not treat Black women and girls well. What can we do to prepare our daughters and our sisters and our mamas for these lives so that they don't end up in these same places? You shouldn't be doing 200 plus months.
Right. I believe that, of course, letting our young women know that they need to love themselves first. They need not only just loving yourself first, but loving that goal, vision, and where you want to go in life. And sometimes you can't let your heart lead you in some of these relationships. You got to let your mind and knowing right from wrong. Because I can't sit here and say that I didn't know right from wrong, but I let my heart lead me because I thought, well, maybe if I stay with him, maybe I can what? Change him. Gus and Odessa, my parents, and they're the heroes to my story. They didn't send me to Hampton University to convert some drug dealer into being a law-abiding citizen. But I feel like when it comes to women and girls in particular too, majority of the women who are incarcerated have experienced some form of trauma. And so I encourage you leaders in the room that when you get in certain spaces, I know President Biden's signed the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, but we need people in positions that understand domestic violence. My 86-year-old judge was sleeping while the domestic violence expert testimony was going on, and didn't take it with
Sleeping during the trial. I want to make sure y'all hear this. The judge was sleeping during the trial.
During my sentencing, he was sleeping, and there were people in the courtroom that wrote letters to the clerk letting them know, but they didn't care. And so and also too, like you heard in the video, well, maybe you didn't, but the government held me accountable for 255 keys of crack cocaine. And to your point, the prosecutor said in the courtroom, I didn't handle, use, or sell any of the drugs that were involved. But because of conspiracy drug laws, which is a big issue along with mandatory minimum sentencing, the judge wasn't able to just look at my individual what I was accountable for. They held me responsible for the total amount of drugs in the conspiracy. And oftentimes you have the girlfriend problem where girlfriends are getting caught up. And when everything hits the fan, the guys who's actually hustling have information to share with authorities that will get them a reduced sentence. But the girls, because they don't know anything about the business, end up staying in prison with a bunch of time.
So the dudes that actually did the drug dealing snitch. And even if you wanted to, you can't because you don't know nothing because you wasn't doing it.
Right. And because I want to make sure I don't leave this room, because I have a table set outside, because one of the things, again, with my movie wasn't just about me. There's a character in the film named Michelle West, and she is still she's my friend, she's still in federal prison. She's served over 30 years on her first offense, but she has a double life sentence. So there is a table out there, part of the impact campaign that's been launched along with the film, is about getting President Biden to commute other women sentenced who've experienced intimate partner violence, and also governors across the country to use this act of clemency as well. But if you're interested in supporting Michelle West, please pick up a flyer, scan the QR code. It'll direct you to send a letter to your legislators. But we need to free Michelle West.
Absolutely. Just one more question about this conspiracy thing. Because I know a lot of people don't understand. You ain't got to do a whole lot to get caught up in a conspiracy charge. What kind of things get someone caught up in a conspiracy charge?
You could let somebody use your phone, use your cell phone. You could let somebody use your phone in your house. You could be riding in a car, spring break, college student, think you just going to Miami to hang out, and that car get pulled over, and it's a secret compartment in the car that you didn't know anything about, but they're going to hold you responsible for it all day long. You could just be at the wrong place at the wrong time. And to be quite frank, there are people who are cooperating to save themselves. So again, you may want to be careful of who you associate with, because if they're trying to save themselves, they can make up something and say, such and such would hold X amount of drugs in her dorm room on certain day, or her apartment. And that's enough to bring you in and having to call a lawyer too, especially with federal drug policy.
Young people, please hear this. All them people that say they're not going to tell.
Oh yeah.
They're going to tell the cops more than they want to know. When it's time to go to jail and they're looking at 1 trillion years, they will tell everything. And like you said, they will even make it up. And for those of you who are, some people, and some people want to be around that world. They ain't really about that world, but they just want to be around it because they think it's cool or it makes them feel a certain way. I'm telling you, it don't take much. Like you just said, giving somebody a ride, telling somebody to meet, so-and-so said, meet them at the such and such. These very little things that you think make you feel cool can absolutely get you facing 1 trillion years. I'm trying to tell you, that is not what you want. And so the decisions ahead of time are important. Parole, probation, these are things that people think about, they talk about a lot. Does the system work well? And if so, why? If not, why not?
I would imagine in some instances it does work well, but when I was released from prison, I was happy to sign my piece of paper that said that Clinton had released me, but I was on probation for 5 years. And I can remember petitioning the court to get off probation early, and it was maybe like 6 to 7 months early. And the federal Eastern District Court wanted to waste money to bring my former prosecutor, former DEA agents. Basically, they were saying little snide remarks behind me. But
Were they mad? Were they jealous or hating because of the Clinton thing?
They were hating and just, I think, wanted to poke at me because they said, "Oh, you can retire now," and just saying ridiculousness. But they fought for me to stay on probation those additional months, even though I was doing all these amazing things. But with regard to, I had the opportunity to also, like I said, serve on the Virginia Parole Board. And one of the things that we would look at is, whether or not someone should be taken off of their supervision early. And there's too much bias. There's already bias with us with enforcement, with sentencing, but trust and believe, when it's time to decide if it's a Black person, there's these misconceptions and biases that go along with that. So I think that there's racial bias that goes on. I know that there's not enough housing opportunities. So there needs to be resources within our communities, because there could be a perfect candidate that could be released early and be put on supervised release, but because there are no housing opportunities, they're less likely to want to release that person. And, just briefly, well, two things. I think paroling agencies and probation agencies, they need to diversify who it is that they're hiring. Oftentimes, it could be, former law enforcement, people that, work in the prison complex. But I do think that we need to make sure there's some social workers, some drug counselors, because they understand the diversity and the mitigating circumstances. And you can't lock people up for decades and have this still punitive mindset once they get out of prison. There needs to be like some type of, I don't know if you want to call it reward system, but something that's not punitive based, but something that's more so when that person does well, that they get some type of reward for that good behavior versus punishing that person. So
Yeah.
those are just a few things that I can think of.
I was thinking about my brother's been in and out of prison for most of my adult life. Like he just got sentenced again at the end of June. And I remember it's one of the things they said, to your point. They were like, well, if we were, they weren't going to do it anyway, but if we were to let him out, could he live with you? And I live in a different state. So they're like, you'd have to move back to this state, be here. And that's impossibility. But he has literally no other place to go.
Yeah.
And it's like, if he can be home and all he needs is a house, he doesn't have a house. Now the only public housing you have is a prison. That seems to me to be
That, and also when you talk about mental health, there are a lot of people in prison because there's nowhere for them to go
yeah.
as far as mental health facilities. And one of the things that shocked me in prison was to see so many geriatric aged people.
Yeah.
And so they have nowhere to go. So therefore, there are other incarcerated people that's helping to take care of these older people because they have nowhere to go. And just simply should not happen.
No, it shouldn't. And drug addiction, we stigmatize drug addiction, and yeah, I was thinking. My brother's heavy on my mind. He just called me as we were sitting here, and
Sorry, I think I saw. Yeah,
yeah,
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be all on your
no,
phone.
no. A prison call when you see one.
Yep, yep.
But it's fascinating. Like he came, he got locked up for one thing, did the time for that, then but had an addiction, comes home, gets put back in for 2 more years for a parole violation. Parole violation was buying drugs because he has a drug addiction.
Yes.
And they're like, you clearly, and what they say to him is basically, you clearly don't want to be free because you keep using drugs. If you've been sitting in a cage and you come home and the first thing you do is get more drugs, you can't help it.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep. It needs to be a holistic approach. And, there shouldn't be like, you mess up this one time by using drugs and you get thrown back in. You got to understand people's coping mechanisms, and there needs to be a holistic approach. I know my girlfriend Tony that's sitting here, she has Ardella's house in Philly that
Yes.
helps women that are transitioning from prison home. But I know she would echo that we need to not just think about if somebody messes up, we're going to throw them back in. We need to work on their mental health, if they have a substance abuse problem, reunification of family, help them with employment, because oftentimes there can be employment issues.
Yeah.
There's supervisors, parole and probation officers that expect you to take time off from work for
Right.
you to come in their office and meet with them. And oftentimes, again, this is where the racial bias, because some of our people may not have the resources to be able to take off work, and they may have a boss that doesn't care about it. And if you leave and you late, or you not at work on time, we're gonna fire you.
Yep.
And then next thing you know, you're still looking at your probation officer and they're threatening to throw you back in prison because you don't have a job.
You don't have a job.
And that's violation of parole.
It seems one could easily look at this system and say it is designed to make sure that there's always people in prison. And I don't know. I would look at it that way for sure. I'm being polite. Yeah, that's what it is, right?
Oh, please, can some congressman, what's his name with the ponytail?
Congressman Green. Yep.
Yes, Congressman Green, thank you so much for coming to our session. I just acknowledged the CBC Foundation and thanking you all for your support, but thank you.
And for all of your work, sir.
That part. Oh, I forgot.
No. It's all the system is jacked up is the point. And we're also entering an election cycle. We're entering a presidential election year. And for these people who are going to vote, they have an opportunity to make some decisions. The question I have is a very simple one, which is what kinds of things should we be asking from our politicians and from our political leadership so that we can fix this thing?
Well, okay. In this season, even with the presidential election, I know in Virginia, there's a Senate seat that we really care about. And you need to make sure whether it's a Senate seat, a sheriff, a prosecutor election, that maybe you host town halls or you be at those debates and you ask them questions that's centered around criminal justice to get a mindset of get their mindset as far as where they are, how do they value our people that are caught up in this system, and get their response. And then once they get elected, be the first person on that door asking them, this is what you said, repeat what they said, and what are we gonna do to move these issues forward? So I just strongly, number one, I mean, y'all all know we gotta get out there and vote. But when you do have these opportunities, especially these CBCF leaders, college students, when they have those conversations on campuses and in your communities, ask those questions, because for real, I mean, even the other night, I mean, criminal justice hasn't really come up other than, President Trump's felonies and stuff like that. But, I'm grateful that Clinton commuted my sentence, okay? And it's been Democrats that, as far as jobs and political, that have supported me. But understand that we need to, this is like not something I should be owning up to, but I lost my train of thought. It'll come back.
But this idea of saying, one, this is a bipartisan struggle, right? Democrats have supported you, but we need everybody to have make a good faith effort to repair this. Yeah, take the last word.
And so, but I'm no dummy. It took me to mature in this criminal justice advocate space to understand that, President Clinton and President Biden signed the crime bill that caused the increase of Black and brown people. You'll see that noted in the movie. But I mean, also before them, it was, Nixon and Reagan. But we need to make sure, regardless of who's in office, and I'm saying this for our Democrats and our Republicans, because there's some of our Democrats that's in office that ain't touching criminal justice. But we need to make sure that on both sides, that we are holding these people that we elect into office. And if they don't understand it or don't know what's going on, then connect them to organizations like Reform that know what's going on, have their ear to the streets, and can help them create policies that will benefit us as a whole.
And I just want to say one more thing, right? I know sometimes as the world gets heavy and we have an opportunity to get justice, or we have an opportunity to do something, think about how it impacts the broader community. I'll tell you what I mean. I remember marching in Ferguson, and we were like, lock them up, right? And I get you. Y'all want these cops locked up, and y'all want these cops to have bail that's $1 gajillion. But please understand that when you want that cop to get $1 million, $2 million, $10 million bail, your cousin is going to get. My brother's sitting right now with $1 million bail. You know what I mean? He sat without trial for 3 years, and I to get him out, we need to give him $1 million for and it wasn't a murder case. Point being, it trickles down. The principle of justice that you have, think about how it impacts all of us. I understand you see an awful thing happen, you're like, try that man as an adult. But then they're gonna try your 14-year-old as an adult. Yeah. Think about death penalty when it comes to your uncles and cousins and brothers and sisters, because they're the ones that's gonna get it. And lastly, even with Donald Trump, when y'all start screaming, he's a convicted felon, do you want a felon to be in office? Trump gonna be just fine. But do we really want to create a situation where we normalize the idea that returning citizens with felony offenses shouldn't get jobs, shouldn't achieve, because they could say the same thing about a whole bunch of us. So
Yeah.
I'm just saying, as we talk and think, let's think about the big picture. Let's think in a spirit of love and truth and justice. That's all.
And I'm not a felon.
Right.
I'm excellent point. I'm not a felon, and we need to be careful of language. And making sure that we use formerly incarcerated people, not convict, felon, because that already has negative connotations.
Exactly. All right, y'all. Please give a round of applause to my dear sister.
Thank you.
Again, you've done so much.
And give a round of applause for my dear brother.
Thank you,
Marc. And we're going to continue to lift your brother up because as you're out here doing this work, like, we need to get some support for him. But appreciate you sharing about him today to us, and because that's very personal. Thank you.
Absolutely.